Okay, so please come in. I think we're about to start in a few more minutes. It's already 30, but let's wait for a few more to come in. Okay, hello, good evening, everybody. Thank you, parties, observers, and others for being here, and welcome to the side event on the ICG Advise Your Opinion, organized by the Youth Climate Movement, Youth and Environment Europe, World Youth for Climate Justice, and us, the youth representatives from the Netherlands. I'm Sarah, and I'm one of the UN youth representatives from the Netherlands together with Dennis, and I'll be moderating this discussion. And before we dive into today's debate, we will watch a small video called Power to the People. So that's how we're going to start this side event.
In every year of the last decade, our world has seen greenhouse gas emissions continue to rise and shatter records. But those responsible for burning the most fossil fuels have not experienced the most direct consequences of climate change. It has been us. The hundreds of millions of people living on the front line of the climate crisis. If global temperatures rise above 1.5 degrees Celsius in my lifetime, countries like mine will vanish beneath the waves. I will be forced to leave the land where my ancestors are buried, and to tell my children they have nowhere to call home. At Rio de Janeiro, Kyoto, and later at Paris, we were promised action. But despite ever more opportunities to address this crisis, the planet is hurtling towards climate catastrophe. Existing international agreements have not provided countries with legal clarity on their responsibilities to reduce emissions, leading to inaction. To break the impasse, the UN General Assembly must request an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice on climate change and human rights. All it would take is a simple majority vote from UN member states. An advisory opinion is not legally binding but carries great legal and moral authority, encouraging all nations to protect the human rights of people affected by climate change. An opinion from the highest court in the world would also help to build a critical global coalition uniting governments and international institutions, and would define exactly what existing bodies of laws nations should follow. In the past, advisory opinions have been instrumental in establishing international laws on the right to self-determination, the prevention of genocide, and nuclear disarmament. We believe it could do the same for climate change. A planet in crisis doesn't have to be our future. If there is power in the world to save humanity from environmental disaster, it is the power of the people. But time is running out, and we have to act now. Please visit our website to join us. In every
All right, welcome everyone. I hope you all agree with me that that's a very powerful message in that video, but maybe more so a very useful video, because it describes what we try to achieve in a very short time. I could never do it as well as that video, but we'll try anyway today. And it's about our road to not just asking, but also getting an advisory opinion on climate change and human rights from the International Court of Justice. And with this, we really seek to clarify the obligations of states to protect the rights of current and future generations from the adverse impacts of climate change. Our story as a global youth movement is one that goes back a few years now. However, that is not my story to tell you. It is actually that of our founder and dear friend Solomon Joe. So I would like to give him the floor, but he's digitally has given us a video message because he is already in New York campaigning for this very same advisory opinion. So let us hear what he has to say.
Warm ocean greetings to you all. It is my pleasure to address you today in the heart of the United Nations climate negotiations that the lives of citizens from all over the world depend on. My name is Solomon Yo, and I'm the campaign director of the Pacific Island Students Fighting Climate Change. And coming from the Solomon Islands, I am far too familiar with the painful impacts of climate change, discounting our human rights of our people in our nation and our region. But a kind reminder that the Pacific is not idle in light of all of this. We are resisting and fighting every day for the future of our present and future generations. However, given the magnitude of the climate crisis, the only way to address it is via global efforts. In this final decade for climate action, we must have a two-pronged approach to address the climate crisis. We must both be laser-focused on reaching equitable solutions within the climate negotiation, as well as looking and utilizing other international mechanisms that are available to us. My brothers and sisters from many Pacific Island countries, together with activists, campaigners, and supporters across the globe, have worked tirelessly to forge breakthroughs. Only in the last year, the Human Rights Council has appointed the first special rapporteur on human rights and climate change, and it has recognized the right to a healthy environment. And our view of possibilities must not end here. All organs of the United Nations have made pronouncement on climate change, except the principal judicial organ of the United Nations, the International Court of Justice. In the past, the ICJ has dealt with most pressing concerns of humanity, including the rights to self-determination, nuclear weapons, and genocide. And we believe that the ICJ can do the same for climate change. We are now looking to the ICJ to clarify the obligations of states under international law to protect the rights of the current and future generations from the adverse effects of climate change, by requesting an advisory opinion. This precise foundation is what motivated myself and 26 other law students from the University of South Pacific to initiate the ICJO campaign in 2019. Since then, we have amassed overwhelmingly support from youth, academics, institutions, and 1,500 civil society organizations across the globe, all of whom have formed a powerful alliance on the ICJ, around the ICJO campaign. The alliance now must show a monumental sign of strength, resilience, and solidarity across the world for climate justice by encouraging leaders around the world to initiate the process of seeking an advisory opinion on climate change from the ICJ in the upcoming United Nations General Assembly 77th session. Your support will be key, and I ask you all to join us on this journey to bring the world's biggest problem to the world's highest court. Thank you, and thank you to us.
Okay, thank you, Solomon, and thank you, Dennis, for your brief but very convenient word. What? Oh, sorry. There's a miscommunication. Still, Dennis is gonna give us a short introduction on what the advisory opinion is. Sorry. Go ahead.
She wanted to silence me, but we are not to be silenced. So what is an advisory opinion, right? Because this was a very convincing words maybe from our founder, I think it was, from the Pacific. And now I would like to take you along a journey that is both about our past, what we've done so far, where we are right now, and also where we're going, of course, which is the UNGA. So an advisory opinion, as you can read, is a legal advice provided to the UN or specialized agencies by the International Court of Justice. So it is something that can be requested by the UNGA. And for that, there is one simple thing we need to do, and we need to convince 97 countries that they have to be in favor of this idea. So why do we want this, right? Because it is a non-binding mechanism, but because it's such a moral and legal authority, coming from the ICJ, this would still have a very big impact on climate action, really. As I said, it started, as Solomon actually said, it started in the Pacific with 26 students that just had an idea that has really grown out to have a little life on its own, really. Can International has really taken it on, and it's signs like that that make me very hopeful that it can move on its own. It doesn't actually need us anymore, but we will still be here to relay this message that we need to convince countries, because it offers really a perspective and opportunity, we believe. As Solomon already said, there's a lot of potential in ICJ advisory opinion. First of all, because the ICJ has never addressed climate change yet. So it's one of the only things within the UN that has not said anything about climate change yet, which is, of course, quite strange, given the urgency of this disaster that's going on, really. So taking this topic to the global level is really something, on the global legal level, is really something that has not been done before, which is why we really believe in these opportunities that it gives us. It will really integrate the nexus between human rights and the climate crisis, provide impetus and guidance for courts, so it can be used for future cases as well. It can cement consensus on the scientific evidence, encourage more ambitious action under the Paris Agreement, and encourage cooperation and support. And I think that last one is very important to stress. This is about coming together, because talking about the Court of Justice, a lot of delegations might be afraid that of courts and litigation, but this is not about litigation. This is about coming together, trying to really face this problem together. If we get an advice like this, it is not about litigation between one country or another, between one population to their governments. It is an advice that counts for us all, and that we have to take very seriously. So what do we want as youth? We really want to assist to reach a helpful and progressive advisory opinion on climate ambition, and we have been doing this very thing. We want to draw attention, especially what is important for us, which is the rights of future generations and intergenerational equity. We want to highlight that climate impacts. We want to highlight climate impacts on human rights and elevate stories of climate injustice by youth. And we want to enable young people and civil society to participate in the court proceedings, which would also be a first case. So in order to get there, we need a country. And this country has been Vanuatu, a very brave country, I might add, because this process is one that knows many bullies, let's say. And we really need to support Vanuatu, not just as young people, but also as delegations, as members of government. They need our support in this. As I said, what do we do then to support this call to action from Vanuatu, and how do we act as allies in their fights for this advisory opinion? Well, first of all, as a global youth-led movement, we try to bring together the youth views from very different areas. We try to show that if youth can come together, why could not governments come together, right? We are youth from all over the world. We are spread very vastly across the globe. We have one very simple message to governments: support this advisory opinion call. We also have been able to provide very easy to understand legal resources by engaging with academia. So even countries that might have a smaller legal delegation or legal people, not a smaller amount of people working on stuff like this, even they can use these resources to understand what is this about, what are the implications, and how do we move forward from here. So that's how we try to provide every country with the same possibilities to be incorporated in this journey. Of course, storytelling of youth through social media and the website, because this is not just about something that is at the UN. This is about actual people trying to create or sustain a livable world for their future. And we try to convene youth at decision-making positions. So for example, at COP26, we had a lot of successful events that we will go into very shortly. And create awareness, of course, on climate justice or injustice and the environment, advisory opinion. So to give you some hope, because you might be thinking it's just youth that want this, but actually recently CARICOM countries have said that they would support this initiative, showing that they are aligning themselves with the Vanuatu government. And we are hoping to see many more of these positive messages very soon on countries supporting Vanuatu. We gather people that might be interesting to this, such as Mary Robinson, the former UN High Commissioner on Human Rights, as friends of the initiative who will relay our message to people that they come across on the importance of this advisory opinion and also on the possibilities. This is an example of academic conversation we had at COP26, and we had some other youth events as well, such as the coalition we built. But we don't just act on international stadiums, also on the national. There should be another slide there with a picture of our national campaign, where the princess, one of the princesses of the Netherlands, actually launched this Dutch coalition of organizations. But you get the idea, so I don't have to necessarily show that. We'll just go on to the next message, which is a video message from someone you may or may not know. She's quite well known within the climate scene online, and she has an important message for you too.
Hello everyone, and thank you for being here. This youth-led campaign strives for climate justice so that you and all future generations can enjoy a healthy planet. Therefore, it is so important that you are here tonight to discuss the advisory opinion and its relevance to the debate on climate justice. My name is Melati, and I'm currently filming this in my garden here in Bali. As you can see, the sun is going down, but the reason why I had to film this video recording is because I believe in the work that the young people with you today are doing. I started my journey as a change maker when I was 12 years old. Today I'm 21 and building Youthtopia, which is a platform where young change makers can exchange knowledge and share knowledge with each other to accelerate change. Because if there's one thing for sure, it's that we know that we do not have the luxury to wait until we are older to create change. The future of change starts right now in this room with your decisions, and I cannot wait to follow from afar all the way in Bali. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you everybody, and thank you Melati also, and Dennis and Solomon for their kind words. So today we will shed light on the advisory opinion and its relevance from multiple perspectives, and I think Dennis has elaborated on the urgency of this campaign. And with this in mind, I want to introduce actually today's speakers. So firstly, I would like to welcome Anthony Janga. And Anthony is a 22-year-old aeronautics student from Bonaire, a small Caribbean island of 20,000 people. Anthony believes that young people should have more to say, especially in decisions that affect them most. This belief led him to start an organization that represents the voice of young people and ensures that young people can give input and have a seat at the table with decision makers. Coming from a small island, he is familiar with suffering the effects and consequences of activities of other countries. For example, Bonaire already experiences a rise in sea levels and more extreme weather patterns. That is why he, along with other young people from Bonaire, is working together with professionals and decision makers to turn the tide on climate change. So welcome, Anthony. Can you maybe raise your hand so that people know who you are? Yes, great, thank you. Yes. And secondly, I want to welcome Sabantho Aderi. She is at the end of the table. And Sabantho is a 23-year-old Indigenous woman living in an urban society outside of her ancestral community, a 240 square mile and 1,700-person ancestral Pakuri Lokona Awak territory in Region 4 in Northeast South America. She is one of the many young Indigenous climate activists that need to be heard in the climate discourse. She currently lives in Barbados, another island nation in the eastern of the Caribbean. And thirdly, we have Harjeet Singh. Harjeet is a global expert on the issues of climate impacts, migration and adaptation, and has been supporting countries across the world on tackling climate change. He also acts as the strategic advisor, global partnerships to the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative. Until recently, he has led Action Aid International's climate change work globally. He is a member of the United Nations Technical Expert Group on Comprehensive Risk Management under the Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage. So that's quite a lot, but I'm happy to introduce you. And fourthly, I want to introduce Arpitha Kodiveri. Arpitha is an environmental law and justice scholar. As a postdoctoral researcher at the Climate Litigation Accelerator, she is focusing on the role of climate litigation in redressing claims of loss and damage due to climate change. She has previously worked as an environmental lawyer supporting Adivasi and forest-dwelling communities in India to secure their land rights as an advocate with Natural Justice, a collective of environmental lawyers. Her research and doctoral dissertation examined legal mobilization by forest-dwelling communities in extractive frontiers in eastern India. She has been a visiting scholar at the University of Melbourne Law and the National University of Singapore. And last but not least, we have Dennis, of course. He is one of the Dutch youth representatives to the UN. His mandate focuses on the sustainable development and youth inclusion in international decision-making. As youth representative, Dennis forms the bridge between the Dutch youth and international policymakers. He travels the country to ask young people what they value when it comes to the topics such as biodiversity, climate change, peace and safety, and international cooperation. He takes his input to conferences and summits all around the globe. With the work of him and his colleagues, they collectively push for sustainable, safe and inclusive future for all of us. So welcome to you all, and I'm very happy that you're here to discuss this very important topic today. So Anthony, to ask you the first question, I want to ask you about your experiences as a young person coming from a small island in the Caribbean and how this is for you.
Okay, yes, there you go. Well, it's paradise, to me to answer that. It's amazing to live on an island. It's paradise. You have nice beaches, clear blue water. The vibe is amazing. We have a tranquil vibe, a kind of slow mentality where if you don't finish your work today, you'll finish tomorrow, so no rushing. So I miss that as well. But you get tired of it because as an island of 20,000 people, it's so small. It does have a nice community, so you can always rely on each other for anything actually. But as a young young person who wants to explore the world, you get tired of it because you've already seen everything. There's no new challenge. So yeah, that's basically Bonaire.
All right, and you mentioned that living on a small island actually faces the implications and the consequences of climate change. So can you maybe elaborate on the consequences of climate change that you face on your small island?
Well, sure. We are already experiencing extreme weather at this moment, so extreme drought. When I talk with older people or with my grandparents, normally between October and December it's rain season. It's snow here, there's rain. And sometimes there's no rain at all. And you hear them say like, hey, this is so weird. Normally it would be pouring at this moment. So then you can already notice that there's a difference in the weather. Fishermen are also very concerned, as they say that when they go fish, they're seeing fewer fish. So that's also a great concern for our food safety, of course. Yeah, that's actually what we're noticing at the moment on Bonaire.
Right, and you started an organization, right, on Bonaire to include young people and to collect their voices to make a case about this. And how do you do that?
Well, let me give you a little bit of background info first. Bonaire is part of the Netherlands. We're a special municipality. That means that the minister in the Netherlands is responsible for us. They make the policies for us. Of course, we do have our own mayor and commissioners on the island, but as I would like to say, they just walk around and try not to set the island on fire. But the real decisions that happens in The Hague. And what we see the last few years are that we're not getting enough attention for climate change. As I said already, we are experiencing it. We see changes. People are also suffering from it, but there's no campaign about what climate change is. For example, if you talk to people on Bonaire about it, a lot of people don't even know what climate change is. They just see things changing, for example. And it's really very weird because in the Netherlands, for example, you have climate protests and you have a lot of policymakers coming up with solutions to tackle it. But for Bonaire, who is also part of the Netherlands, you don't see anything happening. So that's a bit weird. And seeing as we young people are the ones who are going to how do you say, gain this problem in the future when we take over, I said I think it's time that we should take matters in our own hands and collect young people, set up an organization and try to get our voices out there. We can't just sit aside and wait for them to come with a solution because that will never happen. I think it would be best for us to come with a solution and present it to them and try to get the ball rolling and try to have some influence in that. So that's what we're doing at the moment. We're just collecting young people who think alike, who are also very passionate on this subject, and basically drafting a plan about what we see that there are possible solutions for our island. It's also nice to say, for example, that we think that seeing that our island is very unique and very small, it could be a very great living lab, we say in the Netherlands, in Dutch, proeftuin, where we can experiment with climate innovations and see if it works or not. If it works, then you can scale it up, you can implement it on bigger countries, bigger markets, and if it doesn't work, then try and error, and then you can go with something else. So that's what we're trying to influence, and that's what we're trying to lobby at the moment with the decision makers.
Wonderful, that sounds pretty cool and very useful as well. And do you think that the advisory opinion can help you within this strive for more climate action actually on your island?
Well, yes, of course. The more people who help us, the better. As I said before, at this moment, we're not getting any attention whatsoever. So if we get our stories out there and more people help us share our stories and more people help put Bonaire on an international spotlight, that would help for sure.
Okay, thank you so much for your contribution. And then I would like to move to Haji, because you have a more civil society perspective. So I would like to ask you how you see this and how the advisory opinion can complement the perspective you have.
Sure, thank you very much for having me and among young people. So it's an honor to be here. First of all, congratulations to young people from the Pacific for understanding how important the issue is, and then working with the Vanuatu government and other civil society organizations to really make it an issue and make it a campaign in a manner that all of us are now able to join, and that's absolutely remarkable. And we as Climate Action Network also feel privileged and honored to support that. In the last few years, we have also shifted gears. As you know, CAN has been following negotiations for the last 30 years since the convention, even before that. So the ECO that you see is actually 50 years old. So it was first published by a group of people way back in 1972. And I was in Stockholm before that. I was like, you should have told me. I would have tweeted from there. Anyway, we reminded everybody when we came here. But we have been in this space, and this is an important multilateral space. But when we really reflect back, we realized as CAN that a lot more needs to happen on ground, in countries, at the local level, in the capitals. Because this, in a way, is a bubble. And an important bubble, because when it comes to writing policies, and this is a UN space, all governments come here, one country, one vote, technically, Vanuatu and Tuvalu are as powerful as bigger countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, or the US. We can't expect the same thing in G7 or G20s of the world. However important they are or big they are in terms of economy or their military might. And this is how, when we came to know about this initiative from the students to Vanuatu government taking it up to our Pacific Island CAN node, we were absolutely impressed. And we said, this is something that we should get behind, because there is so much power in the idea. And especially when we look at what we achieved here in this space, we've got Paris Agreement. Great that about 200 countries are together. We have decided on a common direction, but we are going extremely slow. And the reason we are going extremely slow, or why we took several years or decades to come to this common point, or even the previous agreements we had, we could not really implement, because these are not climate negotiations, I must tell you. The name is climate negotiations. These are trade negotiations. People who come here are only thinking about economy, only thinking about their markets, and how to make money through this process. Be it installing solar panels or wind farms, but also making money on, from the misery of people. And I feel really angry and frustrated when they talk about how private sector can help adaptation, or now they say how private sector can how private sector can engage in loss and damage. So they should stop causing loss and damage. That's the first thing private sector has to do. Because the kind of private sector we have created is a monster, right? Look at fossil fuel industry. The main cause behind the crisis that we have, with all the talk around renewable energy, it's actually feeding into the increased demand of energy. You know what's the proportion of fossil fuel in our global energy supply right now? 80%. And how much it was 10 years ago? So let me use the accurate number. It's 80.2% right now in 2019. And how much it was in 2009? 80.3%. So that's where we are. That's how powerful the companies are. And through this process, they have been able to protect their interest. And we have not been able to make the kind of progress we should have. We knew about the issue. We had all countries coming here, but why we did not make progress? Because there was something missing. And what was missing was people. We were only talking about gigatons, gigawatts, only temperature goal. We were not able to articulate what is going to be the impact of success or failure of this process on people. And the moment you put people at the center, everything changes. Your questions change, your way of negotiation changes, and that's the kind of change we want to see, and that's the power of the idea of ICJ campaign is. When we talk about this campaign, when we are going to be approaching the UNGA and then the ICJ and the whole process, it's going to be about people. It's going to be about their life, their livelihoods, their culture, their language, how they are getting displaced, how they are rebuilding their lives, what kind of support they need. The whole conversation changes. And then everything else, which is important, solar panels and wind farms and clean fuel, everything is important, but all of that then contributes to a sustainable, a healthy living, and not the other way around. And because we have been stuck, so we started with the wrong side of the thread or end or stick, whatever you call it. Because we could never understand why we are coming here, and that's how the whole conversation has been so much about protecting their economy, and that's why countries did not make progress, because they said if I start investing in renewable energy now, which means that my cost of energy is going to go up, I'm going to be disadvantaged in this competitive economy, so let somebody else move forward. And had we put people at the center, the whole conversation would have been extremely different. We would have talked about what actions will prevent people from these harms and what actions we need to take. And this is where we actually lost so many years and decades. But this is a very critical moment. We have reached a point where science is absolutely clear, and unfortunately impacts are increasing. Politicians have been made aware, but it is still not a people's movement. And this is where this campaign really provides an opportunity to civil society to talk about people, to talk about their lives, to talk about what kind of future we're looking for, we are going to build, and that's where it's about intergenerational rights. So this actually simplifies what we have been fighting for, and not these complex jargons and something that has actually kept so many citizens and several disciplines away from the climate. Every day we are churning new concept or a new jargon or a new acronym, which is making so hard for others to collaborate. And this is where this campaign should actually reach out to several constituencies, be it faith constituency, people who are working on health, people who are working on food security, people who are working on water issues for a very, very long time. And if you go to developing countries and ask, are you working on climate change? They say, no, I'm working on water. Climate change is all about water. But we didn't make that connection. And when we talk about people, how people's lives are becoming difficult because of climate change, immediately that person would say, yes, I am working on climate change and I really want to solve the problem. I think this is exactly what we have to do, and as civil society, we feel that it really complements. So here in this space, we have to develop policies. This is where we have to set accountability. We have to work with our government so that they can go back and develop national policies. But we have to change the narrative. We have to change the discourse. And this is where ICJAO campaign is very complementary to the efforts that we are making. Otherwise, we'll just remain in this bubble and we'll keep moving towards a catastrophic world. And to break that, we need to involve people. So for me, it's not just the destination we are going to achieve through this advisory opinion or the first step that we have at UNGA in terms of resolution. It's about how we are going to involve people. I think that's where civil society plays that role. We have to really break the barriers and break those silos and go to anybody and everybody who is working on any aspect of development, or a small shopkeeper to a big industrialist. We have to talk about this issue to everybody. We need all hands on deck, and we need a whole society approach. Only then we'll be able to solve the problem, and not only operating in this space. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And you mentioned that the process now is going very slow. And how can civil society now contribute even more towards progress, actually? And how can society or civil society contribute to the advisory opinion, for example, or the campaign on the advisory opinion, and how can we keep pushing it also in the near future to achieve what you actually have been saying?
So I did cover a part of it. I think for us, in the immediate term, it's really important to go back and talk to our governments, because we don't have a lot of time right now to reach out to citizens around the world, and we don't have those kind of resources. But as a very immediate thing, how we work with our governments and their representatives who come to the UNGA process to help them understand how important it is, and some of the things as Dennis was clarifying, and we also heard yesterday from the Honorable Prime Minister of Vanuatu, that it's not antagonistic, it's about looking at a new future. It's about bringing everybody together. It's about having an approach where we are not going for litigation, but we are trying to get that institution which should guide, which should provide the opinion on how important it is. So I think as a very immediate step is about clarifying how important it is. And even some countries who, what we call them blockers in so many ways, and who are not allowing any progress to happen, but have very strong human rights framework back home. I think that's where citizens can put a lot of pressure. We should be reaching out to our media friends who can write about it, so that the policymakers who go to the UN actually feel the pressure, because they have been talking about human rights for their own citizens, but it's not just about for their own citizens, how they then contribute to a global process where everybody's human right is respected. I think that's where the opportunity is. But as I said, that's just the first step. But we have to reach out to more and more people. And once we succeed in getting that resolution, then that opens up a whole new world for us, where we are going to start collecting testimonies and stories and solutions so that we can then go to ICJ and say, who is causing the problem and who is suffering and what kind of opinion is required to guide governments to enable right kind of policies nationally, but also come to the spaces like this at UNFCCC and CBD, Biodiversity Convention, and actually change things for better. And we have to put intergenerational equity at the heart of it, people at the heart of it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your answer. And with regard to reaching out to people and even more people, I want to move on to Sabantho, because can you tell us a little bit more about your background and how you represent indigenous peoples and how you experience fighting for human rights within the scope of climate change?
Okay, so if you guys can please excuse me, I'm not a speaker, I'm more of a writer, so I'll be looking at my computer most of the time. Well, one example for me in my community is that a previous government of ours had suggested that we move our entire village because the river started to flood annually instead of every decade once. And we said that we're not going to move. And so now the government gives us annual flood mitigation and reaction efforts. So that's one example.
Okay, and do you think that the advisory opinion can complement your fight for more climate justice?
Absolutely. So sea levels are rising, and it's causing indigenous peoples who live on low-lying islands and even those with coastal communities to lose their lands and territories. And in other areas, there's desertification, and it's causing the inland indigenous communities loss of production. And they depend on these to survive, obviously. And these areas are being increasingly struck biannually wildfires as well because of the dryness. So productive lands are also being lost as the natural flora and fauna cannot adapt to the frequent ravage of wildfires, which usually goes hand in hand with decreasing rainfall to actually drought conditions in many cases. The melting ice in the Arctic regions as well is devastating wildlife and indigenous communities that depend on traditional hunting, gathering lifestyles. In other areas, excessive rainfall leads to flooding, which causes cascading detrimental effects by landslides and fertile land erosion. Rivers overflowing onto the river banks and destroying crops. We can't tolerate these situations and conditions. So we're even losing houses and lives. So I think that, like personally, in relation to this, future generations for me, means that I think once these become implemented, or if they hopefully do become implemented, that the short-sightedness and the short-sighted actions of the elders, the governments, and them not listening to us, maybe one day that'll change. And maybe one day the youth won't have to fight for a voice and to be heard and for actions to occur because of us constantly being in their faces and being pests. And one day maybe humanity will just take care of the world without having to write down anything about it.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. And I think it's a very important point you raised about future generations, because that is also what the advisory opinion is about, you know, securing future generations a future, actually. So I think that's a very important point, so thank you so much. And actually, with regard to well, saving a future for future generations, I want to move on to Arpitha, because you're specialized in loss and damage, which is all about reparations and compensation, of course, but today we're also talking about an advisory opinion, and the government of Vanuatu has clearly stated that the advisory opinion is not intended to seek reparations. And can you maybe explain how an advisory opinion is different to regular climate litigation between states or citizens and their governments?
Sure. I think before I sort of jump into that question, I just want to sort of preface that with a bit of an analysis of where we are in the moment of lawmaking. So I don't think we're in a moment where it's just the climate crisis. I think it's also a crisis of legal imagination. So we're at a time where legal imagination is either slave to capital or it's been colonized by powerful interests. Now, when you already have that gridlock, how can you unlock legal imagination to serve for a better future? And I think that's where an advisory opinion gets situated. Because in processes like this, the one that we're in and the one possibly many of us are a part of, you see that, as Harjeet mentioned, like questions about people and people's lives gets diluted into bureaucratic processes. How can we kind of shift the gaze from something that's already insular into a space where radical possibility can be enabled? So I think that's sort of one kind of preface to where the advisory opinion sits. But the advisory opinion, as you mentioned, is not litigation. I think the primary function of an advisory opinion is to provide interpretive guidance, right? Because if we say that legal imagination has been curtailed and constrained by all these different factors, then interpretation perhaps, which is a very powerful task, should be more responsive to social movements and people's lives. And the one way to do that is to go to the advisory opinion route. And that might provide more impetus as well to kind of create interpretive bridges across different legal regimes. So you have human rights, which has kind of evolved on its own. You have environmental law, which is evolving on its own. And you have climate law as well, which is kind of trying to create an interface but hasn't succeeded. So I think the advisory opinion will serve that key function of actually solidifying and clarifying what does the rights of future generation mean? How does, what does a human rights lens actually mean for the climate change problem? And how can it add to it? The other thing is we don't have the luxury of time, as the videos have mentioned, as everybody here is talking about it, right? So we cannot wait for a negotiation process to yield this particular legal clarification. I think we have to look outside it. And I think the advisory opinion is perfect because it supplements it. It also gives it a benchmark kind of process where it says, you know what, the law can actually be this, or this is how we can actually move forward. Because there again is, I would continue to say that the legal imagination is just so flat right now around here, that alternative possibilities seem to be completely silenced.
All right, thank you. And as you mentioned, the law is a little bit flat, but what we see worldwide is that a lot of young people or a lot of NGOs are actually turning to courts to ask for justice. And can you maybe explain why people are turning to the courts? It might be a straightforward answer, but maybe from your expertise, I was wondering how that works and why are they turning to the courts? And can you maybe elaborate on that?
Absolutely. I think the courts have emerged as a very important actor when it comes to the sort of situation that we're in trying to resolve some of it. The reason is many. So I think one of the few reasons that people go to court is lawmaking itself, again, is an inaccessible process, right? It's difficult to go into parliament and lobby and create new legal frameworks. Courts have been more willing to actually engage with these questions, and judges globally have taken on the role of filling the gap in some sense. So you have laws which are inadequate to deal with the climate problem. Then you have social movements who have the strength and the ability to sort of provide alternative legal approaches, and courts are becoming the site where the engagement is happening. And further, what we're seeing is, I think, going back to the point that Harjeet had mentioned, is we do see that the state is kind of deeply embedded in networks of, furthering capitalism. And I think in order to break that, to shift the role of the state from a sort of facilitator of capital to a regulator and to take some action, courts have been quite helpful. So that's one of the reasons. Apart from that, I think the way climate litigation has evolved, it's been quite interesting to see how it accompanies a strong social movement. So it's not like something's happening in the courts and something else is happening in the streets. The streets and the courts are aligned, and that's what's been really exciting about this particular space. But I think largely it is frustration with processes of lawmaking which have not served adequately.
Okay, thank you so much. I think this perspective, this law perspective, is very nice to contribute to the discussion. And maybe to round off the debate, I want to ask Dennis one more time to maybe give one final speech on what the world can do to, push for the advisory opinion and why it is important, and why all these perspectives that has been given. So, for example, the indigenous people, a legal perspective, why all this contributes to, to the campaign of the advisory opinion.
All right, so just that. What we've been trying to do really here, and don't worry, we're not done talking yet. You can ask all your questions after. We've all had a chance to speak on this and share our views. And that's exactly what we've been trying to do, right? To bring together various views from people that maybe are already impacted by climate change, that to describe how they see their experiences change their mindset, and how can this advisory opinion be vital in this, and by trying to show that there's many people that have very different realities, right? And possibly we are in a privileged position here in Europe, in Bonn right now. For some people, it is a very different case. So I can imagine indeed that you are now thinking, wow, this is amazing, and I want to contribute. Harjeet has already explained a lot of what the process is, which comes down basically that we need countries, because we can say all we want, and I think it's kind of almost like preaching to the choir, right? Like I know you're all with me on this when I say that we want to reach such an advisory opinion, and we think that can be very beneficial for global climate action, because it's not about litigation, it's about getting together and raising climate ambition for the people, as Harjeet has explained. So we need countries, and for that we need to start these conversations with all the countries that you're from. I can already count some of the people that I know that make up, 15, 20 countries right now. That's a fifth of what we need if we can get all those countries aboard. So I see opportunities here, people taking this on, bringing forward this message. When you go back home, if you have any opportunities to speak to your governments, or maybe before you go back home, because this is the place where all the governments are present. I wish there was more of them right here, but it is what it is. So it's about starting this conversation and using the stuff that I described that World Church for Climate Justice has provided you to make it very accessible to join this movement, speak to your government, try to convince them, try to spread the word of why we're doing this, as people have described here, and how we will achieve this, because we will achieve this. I'm very confident. I think maybe if someone else has something to add to that.
Well, I think you opened another discussion actually, so maybe we can wait a few more minutes with the questions, because as you said, we need to start the conversation with our countries. But before we do that, maybe it's also nice to know what the legal consequences are of such an advisory opinion. So maybe I want to also ask you to maybe elaborate on that together with Dennis. And what we can expect from a document that is open to interpretation by member states, because as we mentioned, the advisory opinion is non-binding, but what can member states expect? Because I think this is nice for you to know as well when you take this back to your own country, like what do you need to say to your country, actually?
Should I start and then you add with the professional side of it?
Yeah, that's good.
I'm just here for bonus, right? For spec and bono, we would say. So what the hope is that it will do the same as it has done in the past, as the video explained. Sorry, what? Oh, okay. As the video explained before, in the past it's been very influential in nuclear weapons treaties, displacements issues. So it has already proven very successful in bringing these global issues to a global level, but not by enforcing reparations or litigations, but by bringing people together. And because it's such a moral and legal authority, the International Court of Justice, as the highest court in the world, it really has this potential to give a precedence for the future. And so if we talk about what we hope, even though it is non-binding, because of its success in the past, we are very confident that it can do the same for climate. And yeah, I think you might want to add something.
No, I think you've captured it quite marvelously. So I think the only thing I'd add to it is we're in a situation where law is always playing catch up, right? Whether it's with the evolution of science or the legal issues we're facing. So having a resource like this, I think it probably has a cascading effect as countries start to develop new norms and new laws. There's something that they can hold on to. And I know this is not litigation, but courts are increasingly playing an important role because citizens are approaching courts. A document like this will also resonate with courts as they're trying to kind of rule on these difficult questions. So overall, I think it would just be such an important legal resource and it'll fill such an important gap. And we need to do it because these processes take way too much time.
Okay, I think that's a nice ending of the conversation, and I'm very happy to take your questions now. So, is there anybody who wants to ask a question to the panel? Yeah, I see there a question in the middle of the room.
Eva, can you? Yeah. There's a microphone. Otherwise, no one can hear you at home.
Yes, thanks. Good evening, everyone. I'm Dirk Kruisman from the Netherlands. It's really interesting to listen to this panel, so thank you so much for all your insights, also from different perspectives. My question is on, I think several of you mentioned that we're not only facing a climate crisis, but also a biodiversity loss crisis and pollution crisis. I think UNEP even names them as a triple crisis, and they're all quite interlinked. So my question is, why is the advisory opinion mainly focusing on climate? Is it also involving the other elements, or is it a way to also link them? Because I see you're already quite far in this process, which I think for sure will succeed, but I think it's also relevant to integrate those other elements in this process. Thanks.
Yes, great question. Who wants to elaborate on this?
I'll try. So I think if you can, you know, we have been working on this for 3 years to propose one single question. It's just a very long process, and the two are, of course, very connected. So we hope that an advisory opinion on climate and human rights will also trickle down into other areas, because they're not different areas. They're always interconnected, right? Biodiversity is related to climate, and we need biodiversity also for climate action. So by hopes of this raising climate action, hopefully it can also address the role that biodiversity can play in that. But it's already such a tedious process to get one question framed in exactly the way we want. To give you some perspective, if this goes through, or no, when this goes through the vote, it is not a given that this question is exactly phrased the way we want it. So we try to focus on what is, to us, the most important aspect right now, and that's connecting human rights to climate and the intergenerational aspect of that. It will go through a tedious process of negotiations, for which someone of the Vanuatu government hopefully will work very hard. But yeah, you're absolutely right that there is a lot of connection between the three. But we hope that because there's that connection, by focusing on the climate side of it, it will also affect the other sides. I don't know if maybe someone else has any thoughts on this.
Haji, do you want to add to this?
Well, I would say it's not that the issues of biodiversity or other crises are not important. I think the way we, as Dennis said, we look at the interconnections and the way we have been talking about climate change, and there has been a momentum. So that provides a unique opportunity to talk about climate, but not stop at that and connect it with the related crisis. And this also, as I was saying earlier, this also has the opportunity to really connect it across various sectors and thematic areas, and at the same time bring a lot of people together, not just looking at, by focusing on climate crisis. That's my understanding as well.
All right. Maybe moving on to the next question. Yes, Rick?
Thank you so much. First of all, I want to thank the entire panel. I think the side event's been very insightful. I think a lot of things that you said, all the perspectives that really complement each other, I think they grant us a lot of knowledge. I think that's really great, and I also want to recall specifically what Arpitha said about the lack of legal imagination. I think that was a great comment, something that really makes us all wonder about where we could take this process potentially. Now, I want to kind of take a little bit of the optimism that we heard from Dennis, and let's imagine that this advisory opinion goes through, and we've already seen in the past, as you rightfully mentioned, the power of advisory opinions. I think particularly on nuclear affairs, nuclear weapons, it set a standard that we can still see today. But let's take it a bit further, because there it was also afterwards used in international treaty making and in deliberations within the UN sphere. So the question that I want to ask to all of you, to whom could provide me with an answer, is if we get this advisory opinion and the ICJ comes up with a verdict, what would be the next step? How do we instrumentalize this to get the gains within the broader fight against climate change that we would so likely want to see? Thank you.
Thank you. I think this would be a good one for Arpitha. Do you want to elaborate?
No. Okay. No, that's a great question. I think it's also a great question in terms of how does one develop legal strategies as well. So I'd probably speak a little bit more to that. And it's good to develop legal strategies with hope when you're working on the climate. So assuming that the advisory opinion arrives and it is what we've all been hoping for, and it comes through a process where, as Harjeet and Dennis have mentioned, it's sort of bottom up. I think the next steps would be to catalyze that legal discourse, both at the domestic, local, and international level. So it becomes, in a way, an instrument that can be used not just as interpretive guidance, but slowly penetrates into hard and soft law. And those are different routes one can take. Most countries at the moment are deliberating on possibly passing a climate law, or there might be courts deciding on the intersection of those issues. And there is a healthy network of climate lawyers. I mean, lawyers are not the best. Lawyers, as Katharina Pistor says, are coders of capital, but then they're decoding. So it also becomes a way for lawyers to start to kind of use that advisory opinion and that jurisprudence in their practice. And I think that's when you can sort of democratize that advisory opinion and sort of let it percolate across. That's my hope. And the hope is that it kind of, like I said earlier, has a cascading effect across those multilateral environmental agreements and instruments. But I'll stop there. I think Harjeet and Dennis will have much more to add.
Well, I would say the ultimate aim is not just the advisory opinion, but turning that into a public opinion, because that's what lawmakers listen to. So the reason laws are catching up because lawmakers are not listening. And lawmakers will listen only when there's a public opinion. And again, how do we use this process, this journey, in creating that awareness is extremely important. In any democratic setup, we talk about, judiciary plays one role, but you also have executive, you also have legislative. And then you have other pillars of democracy like media and civil society. So how do we connect all these pillars? And when they kind of stand in harmony, only then we can construct something positive. So the ultimate aim is to have that public opinion, that pressure that will actually inform all these pillars, and that's where media plays a very important role. So as we walk towards the advisory opinion, media and civil society are going to create that atmosphere where judiciary, national level, they, of course with the opinion, once we get the opinion, then judiciary, again another example, or many examples where national level judicial system has drawn references from these opinion. So, and when there's a public opinion, they push the legislative and executive, they start listening to, and then the laws are created. So I would say we need to really focus on public, how we take that. And once you have that opinion, it's also very authoritative. And especially in climate, look at the kind of disinformation campaigns we have seen related to science. But now the way IPCC is articulating, the IPCC has also learned a lesson, not just about good science, but also about good communication. So similarly, when we have this opinion and you are saying the world's biggest court is saying it, I think that the buck stops there. That's it. Now we don't want any confusion. We don't want, will not allow any disinformation campaign to say who's responsible. And that's where we have to talk about, and we hope that kind of advisory opinion we are able to get. It clearly says who has caused the problem, and again, I'll say fossil fuel industry and all our overconsumption and those kind of policies. And then who is suffering and what needs to happen. So if you have such an opinion which is so clear, then there are no debates about it. Then it's all about action. And as I said, we say IPCC has said it, nobody asks you another question. We say it's an IPCC report, that's the end. I think we need a similar thing from the ICJ, that this is an opinion which everybody needs to follow. That's my dream and my hope.
Yeah, to shortly add on that, indeed, what you hope is that this becomes a tool for people. Right? People are inspired, and that public opinion, indeed, that advisory opinion, I like that. I'm going to use that, steal that. But also coming back to the last question, right, about connecting, that it's also about the people that so far, in terms of human rights and climate change, has been really struggling to connect those two. Indigenous people who 5%, something like that, you can probably tell it better than me, but someone has told me recently that 5% of the population can be seen as indigenous, that they protect 80% of biodiversity. So if we can give people like that the tools to really bring forward their cases on human rights and their connection to climate change, I think that would start to live on its own. Yeah.
And maybe a follow-up question based on this. Yeah, but it's a follow-up question. No, that is, you don't get away so quickly. But I think in line with Rick, what Rick has been saying, I think that maybe the question was also focused on, let's say you have this advisory opinion and it becomes a public opinion, which is very good. And of course it has to be something that is supported by the people. But also to connect it with the story of Anthony, and also to connect it with the story of Sabantho, like how do you actually put it into practice? So you have this opinion, and how as a state, so actually to view this from a state perspective, how does the state deal with it?
I think that's what Harjeet was also trying to explain, that hopefully, because states are receptive to public opinion, it will not necessarily mean more court cases and using this. It can, but that's not the goal. The goal is that countries themselves can see that this is important to the people because of the public opinion. So then, hopefully, it will inspire them to raise their climate actions, to raise their attention to places like Bonaire, which are, well, we can say forgotten.
Yes.
Yes, we can say that. As we've heard, right? So, in that way, like I said, it really has to become a thing of its own and starts to live and flourish.
I'll just add one or two lines. I think it's about building a narrative. No one thing is a magic wand. Let's just understand that. The Paris Agreement, look at it. We have got it. Well, have we succeeded? No. But it is important. This is where things are landing, and this is where we want policies to be formulated and accountability to be set up. So everything contributes, and we are building a narrative. We are building an ecosystem where everything is in sync, and it's supporting the other. So, as I said, the journey towards UNGA first, where we focus a lot more on governments, then the journey from UNGA to informing the ICJ is going to be a lot more about testimonies and reaching out to people. You are actually creating a lot of that your noise around it, and your visibility around it, awareness. So that journey is very important. Once you get that opinion, how do you then use it in media? And because you have involved so many people and they see that as their victory, they're going to be talking about it. You have even more ways of amplifying that message. And even after getting it, that doesn't stop there. Then you use that opinion, like we're using IPCC report. Then you actually go everywhere and talk about it, saying we've got the opinion, now the policies need to change. And you use that to change. So let's understand it's not going to stop, or once we get it, it's not like every policymaker is not waiting for that opinion. I wish they were. But that's not the world operates. So they have their deeply entrenched interests. So we have to use that as one more tool to push them harder. But this can be a really powerful tool. Again, depends on how we get involved and mobilize people around it.
Yes, thank you for your clear explanation. Thank you so much. I saw also a question in the front.
My name is Lasse Björn. I'm one of 6 individuals who have a case in the European Court of Human Rights, and we probably will have a verdict on that, not soon, but sometime. My question is, we have been through a same process in Norway by trying to build a climate lawsuit from the people of Norway and gone through the Norwegian court systems and trying to do the same kind of movement and quite successfully change the narrative on discussing oil policy in Norway from being something that wasn't discussed at all to something that's actually allowed to talk about in the media. But my question is, how, since we are part of litigation, we are part of the people who are using the court systems for litigation, is it preferable if we keep silent? Because, for example, states like Norway is now quite afraid of any language on climate law. We feel that every time something comes up, they don't want wording on it because we have been pushing them so hard on climate law, meaning that if they see that we are pushing for this, then they will feel that, okay, something is behind here. So I'm now just thinking, how can we help support this initiative?
Very well question. Yes, who wants to answer this?
I'll try, and feel free to add, whoever feels comfortable with that. Yeah, in a similar way, in the Netherlands, we have the same thing where it's because of past cases, maybe the government's more reluctant to discuss this with us, but we are discussing it and we are talking about it. So I think there's definitely no harm in you joining this cause, and you have connections already apparently. So you can start the conversation, and in that it's very important to stress what we've been trying to stress. Right, this is not that's the same kind of thing. It's a slow process to try to convince that you are not just sneaking another climate action or case in their way. But I mean, it shouldn't stop you, right, from addressing the issue, just because of past actions, I think. And it makes it a bit more difficult, but not impossible. And as long as we focus on what is really being said here and what is really the goal of this advisory opinion, which is specifically not litigation, then I don't see any reason why there wouldn't be at least an ability to have a conversation about this. But yeah, it's difficult, but not impossible. Does that answer your question?
And I think also if you just continue the dialogue, actually, that doesn't hurt, right? So if you're just representing a interest that it's very dear to you, and if you're representing a lot of young people that strive for climate action, then it's never bad to keep going on with the conversation. So I think that's also something I learned as a youth representative. If you really believe in it, and you represent a lot of people that believe in the same thing, I think you should always keep going with the conversation. And I think Dennis wants to add as well.
I was just thinking, also the fact that this vote is coming up, whether they like it or not. So even if they don't want to talk about it, they have to take a position at some point. So it's not optional. Well, you can abstain, of course, but so I guess it is optional. But still, this vote is coming up, and we're working very hard, and it cannot hurt to try.
If there are no questions, I can come back to it. So let's take questions from the floor.
Okay, good.
First of all, I will also thank you for the conference. My name is Émilie. I'm part of the French Youth Association, and I studied a lot on climate justice. For now, I'm in relation with South America, and in South America, 200 persons were killed last year because they were protesting against some industries and something in relationship with climate, or they were doing actions protesting for the protection of climate, the protection of the environment. And in those countries, I wonder how we can make sure, thanks to an international protection or something, I wonder how can we help them, because inside the country they are already violented, and I don't know. I wonder if you had thought about it, and what could we do for them?
Yeah, first of all, I think it's very, very sad, obviously, also that I never heard of this. And that's, I think, is telling, right? That this is about climate and people fighting for climate justice, and something like this happens and we don't hear about it, which is why we need to bring people into this thing and make the public opinion aware of this, so that these things cannot happen. But in all honesty, I don't feel confident to answer how I can, as a young youth representative, particularly help in that process. But maybe, Arpitha.
Yeah, I think these are challenges that have been existing for really long. Whether we look at the history of environmental defenders protesting against extractive industries, violence has been an integral part of that story. And from a legal perspective, I think one of the things that needs to be done is we do need a more robust international legal framework on the question of environmental defenders. So John Knox sort of had a report when he was a special rapporteur on environment and human rights, but that conversation has not gained sufficient momentum. But what's exciting about the climate justice movement is that it's both international but also locally rooted. And the hope is that that connection can kind of amplify that question. But on the ground itself, one of the things that might be helpful at the moment is, ensuring that there are, legal support when that situation arises. But it's hard. It's hard. I think the only way to do it is through awareness building, media attention, but also the need for laws to protect environmental defenders. And I think that's, again, a huge legal gap that I see. Sorry to restrict my answers to the law, but that's what I know.
Yeah, it's definitely another example of why it's so important to connect these two, right? Human rights and climate change. People fighting for climate justice and their human rights as well. It can be hopefully a very constructive way to avoid those situations in the future. But I'm always happy to think along in the future. Maybe not right now in this panel. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. So I see also a question over there in the middle. Yes.
Thank you. So I'm Lorenzo, and I'm representing here Generational Climate Europe, which is the biggest European network of youth associations focused on climate issues. And yeah, speaking of the role of youth activists and how they can promote, I wanted to ask how concretely you think that, well, because the campaign now to achieve this, to achieve the pronunciation of the ICG is already well advanced, and now you have Valinato who is putting it forward. But I was wondering what concretely can youth representatives around the world still do as civil society representatives to push our governments to make sure that to support this campaign and to make sure that it is achieved, because before we were talking about what's happening if it is achieved, but for the moment it still has to be achieved. So I was wondering how can youth representatives help with that, at the national level, at the regional level, at all the levels, at the UN level, so at all the possible levels of the process.
Before you answer the question, I'm actually wondering what Anthony has to say about this, because you have you have developed a youth-led organization from a very local level, and I think it's also, before we dive into the UN international level and how youth representatives are active there, I think it might be interesting to view this from a local perspective as well. So Anthony, do you mind answering that? How you build up your organization?
So the question is, how do I build up an organization in order to gain influence, right? If I understand your question correctly.
No. The question was in general, how can youth representatives, even those that already have an organization behind them, still support the campaign? So what practical actions, what practical advocacy activities we can do to our local governments or to our regional organizations. So yeah, at a very practical level, what can still be done by youth representatives to support the campaign and to push the UN system, so its members, organizations, but also the UN bodies to move forward with this pronunciation?
Well, I'm gonna be very simple. I think just keep pushing. I've been doing this for like 3 years, and I still don't know what the magical solution is, which activity works. All I can say is, if you keep pushing, if you keep showing them that the current situation is wrong, and come up with solutions, that it helps. If you just keep standing at the side and scream, it doesn't help. You have to be proactive. You have to stay at the table. It's gonna take a long while. It's very challenging, but that's all I can say at this moment. So there's no particular activity in my view that says, you know what, this is something that you have to try. Just keep sitting at the table, keep coming with solutions, keep stay in contact with them. And what's for me, in my perspective, what's very important is if you have a good team behind you, that you're not the only one that's carrying all that weight on your shoulders. So that's my answer on the local level.
Yeah, exactly. So specifically for you, I think you already have the team, and now you're looking at ways to contribute, right? And I don't know if I've given the, I know I'm very, very optimistic, but don't get me wrong, we're not there, like you said. And I might have given the false indication that we are. We're not. So we can definitely use every single person that can relay the message that we've been relaying on you right now, and I hope you will spread it within the network of youth representatives. I'm actually very interested in what that is because I don't know it. And you can join. If you could go to the next slide.
Yeah.
No, that one. The QR code and this email. You can always join us and send us an email, and we will. As I've been trying to describe all the events that we've been organizing, you can do the same thing. Local level with municipalities, on a larger level, and on the national level and on the international level here right now. So we can always continue this discussion if you contact us. We will reach out, or you will reach out to us, and we will make sure. But definitely, there is still many months. Well, not many months, but more than one, and we can use that time to really, we have to repeat, because the decisions are being made at this moment. Countries are taking their positions on this, so there's still enough time. But you're right, we need to move now, and we are very welcome to join that. And I'm happy to hear that. Apparently, it has inspired you. I hope.
And
I hope that answers your question.
I also think that that's maybe, well, actually a broad answer to what also you have been saying throughout the discussion. But I think that it's also a thing from the people, right? So if you really want to be effective on the international level, and if you want to give a dominant voice at the UN level, it's also important to connect with local ones. So if you want to make a statement there at the international level, connect with people such as Anthony, and also with people from indigenous communities, because if you speak to them about their situations, I think it's also very relevant to make a point at the international level. So maybe a bottom-up approach as well. But I'm the moderator, so I'm not really giving my opinion. Yes.
Just to add, and I can see Christopher sitting here, it will be good to point towards the material that Pacific team has already developed, some of their experiences of how they got the whole Pacific on board, the Caribbean countries are on board. So, and what kind of communication tools you can create, because it's also very contextual, very cultural, and each country is different. In Europe, as I was saying earlier, the human rights awareness is a lot more than many other regions. So how can you put pressure through media, through social media? So I think you can develop your strategy around various different countries involving local groups and learning from their experience what really works and what's going to work in case of particularly linking it with human rights, and also very clearly communicating what the campaign is and what it is not. I think it's all about communication tool and drawing from the material that already exists. So I don't know if Sindra or Christopher can point towards that.
Thank you. I think we're moving on to the closing remarks of this panel, at least if there are any other questions. And if you do have more questions, then you can also reach out to us. But maybe move on to the closing remarks. Maybe start here, and then we move on to the...
Sure. Just wanted to say a huge thank you to begin with. It's been such an enriching discussion, and so much of learning has happened. I think my closing remarks, I would just like to restrict it to two main comments. One, I think that a campaign like this is, as Harjeet and others have been saying, an impetus to get voices from below to really influence and shape international, national, and domestic law. Because at the end of the day, the law needs to respond to social movements. We're in a moment of crisis, and the only way we can, fast-pace a lot of these processes is if we create those moments of interaction. And if there are lawyers in the room, not a bad idea to shift your career to becoming a climate lawyer. Time is now. We need more hands on deck. And I guess the second point that I would like to make is, I'm so grateful that this campaign is underway because it gives lawyers like us a lot of hope to continue to kind of fight the fight that we're fighting. And it's good to know that there are different ways in which you can attack this beast of a situation. But yeah, it's also a situation for optimism and opportunity. So I'm going to stop with that, and hopefully we have future legal realities that ensure that we have a stable climate and not a rocky one that we have right now.
Let me use the opportunity to also say something that I wanted to say about your efforts in Norway. So this is really very inspiring, the way young people have taken the lead and suing their own government. It's not easy, it's not safe, And your country is still safer. We are hearing stories where people have lost their lives. And this is where your work is extremely important, and keep talking about it. Because when it comes to Norway or many other countries, who project as if they are climate leaders, but the reality is very different. So your work actually puts them under spotlight that, you can't just do sweet talking, you have to act back at home. You can't just keep doing offshore drilling, but we know that has an impact on people somewhere else. So I think you're doing an amazing work. Keep doing. On the overall thing, I would say, as you were saying, Arpitha, that laws catch up and social movements are ahead, and that's a history. Any progressive law that you have seen, mostly it's from social movements and from below. You talk about civil rights, you talk about women's rights and gender justice, you talk about rights of LGBTQI community, you talk about struggle against racism and colonialism. It's all when people come together. Yes, there are some faces which we see as leaders, but unless there is people's movement, you don't get that. And it's a long process. And because I'm sitting among youth, I will say that, and because perseverance is extremely important. Don't get frustrated or don't give up just because you lose certain fights. That's part of the game. Even if you lose certain battles, we have to win the war. Sorry, it's a wrong analogy, but that's what I have right now. But we have to really keep going, and that's why I was saying that it's not just one thing that you get and you think the whole world is going to change. Look at it. But at the same time, if you look at positively and sitting where we are right now on the issue of loss and damage, as you saw several actions. We were just sitting with negotiators 2 hours ago, and they're saying your action is working. Imagine. Your action that you are doing here is putting pressure on many negotiators, saying this is the reality. And it is reality. We are talking to the chairs here. They are saying they've upgraded it. I'm getting WhatsApp messages that now it's going to be reaching that level. Just a little, this bubble, little space that because they think, if people coming here all the way are making this noise and saying it in so clear terms that this is what is needed, we have to listen to them. And imagine if you are able to create that spiral effect that we can through this advisory opinion, there is a hope, right? We may not get everything, but that keeping that hope, perseverance, and your commitment, your passion, I'm sure we'll get there. Thank you.
I want to close off with some questions. So please be completely 100% honest, yes? Who has heard of this campaign before coming in here? All right, so about half. Who is new to the information but feels quite confident they know what it's about now? All right, I'm happy to see that.
The other half, so it's
yeah. This is what gives me hope. And then the final question, right? Who will tell about this to the people they will see in the next coming days? Exactly.
I told you 100%.
Exactly. So imagine if I counted, there's like 30, there was a bit more before, but 40 people at some point, right? Imagine if every one of those people inspires 5 new people, and they inspire 5 new people. This is just maths. It can go so quickly. So that's what gives me hope. I don't have to repeat. I've said everything. There's a link right there. You'll find me and my colleagues, and we're happy to work with you and bring it to the world's highest court.
I would also like to thank you guys for the opportunity, and I would like to say that sometimes we tend to think that we can't influence certain decisions because we don't have status or we don't have any power, but that's far from true. I mean, I also started 3 years ago, just wanted to change things, and here I am talking with policymakers and other decision makers that I never thought of. But the point is that if you believe in something, if you want to change something, it's gonna take a long time. That's first of all, but it's not impossible. And I started small as well, or me and my team started small as well. We went to town hall meetings, we went to our local parliament and gave speeches. We wrote news articles, and those things actually help. So no matter how small it is, it does have influence. Perhaps not today or tomorrow or next week, but on the long run, there will be one day that you can look back and say, hey, that's how I started, and now I'm actually in the process of making things happen. So it can happen. Thank you very much.
I'd just like to say thank you for having me and thank you for listening. And also to remember that amongst all the endangered species that humanity is also one. And I'd love for you guys to keep Indigenous peoples in your decision making and in mind. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for attending this event, and for the speakers we have small gifts for you for attending, so thank you so much. It has been a pleasure for having you, so Dennis will give you the small gifts. And to the rest of all of you, thank you so much for attending, and yeah.
Also, just one more second, if Christopher, if you're comfortable, feel free to have some closing remarks for yourself as well, but no pressure. Otherwise, I'll leave it at this. And the gift is stroopwafels, and if you haven't tried that ever, you should try it ever. It's a classic Dutch treat. It is sweet, so come take them all. Yeah, exactly. You can, and then they become nice and warm, and the syrup inside becomes kind of